there's, in the US mainstream media, there's this significant new attention on the permit process that subverts the right to protest, and you pen off the protesters far away from the actions. Of course, I'm talking about the coverage not of Denver, but of China. As many of you know, I'm a recovering TV pundit. I was a mainstream TV analyst for years until getting terminated along with Phil Donahue for getting it right on the invasion of Iraq. In fairness, you know, because I was never a regular, I never became a multimillionaire, but in fairness to that top level of pundits, despite their privilege, these are people that are really experts on the American working class. They didn't know it existed until 6 months ago, but now they're experts. And you always hear them talking about the blue-collar folks, or what they refer to as regular Americans, regular Democrats. And the class they're talking about is, well, basically it's all white people. And from watching TV news, so you don't have to, I know all of the various ways that Obama is not one of us. He's just not like us. And the most important words of wisdom I ever saw in this long litany came from David Brooks of the New York Times and public TV. He said this on cable news: Obama's problem is he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who can go into an Applebee's restaurant, an Applebee's salad bar, and people think he fits in naturally there. He has to change to become more like that Applebee's guy. Now, some independent bloggers, progressive bloggers, did a little research, and they found it would indeed be difficult for Obama to fit in naturally in an Applebee's salad bar because Applebee's restaurants do not have salad bars. Thank God, or goddess, that we have the independent media. Now, I want to introduce our panel. We're going to talk about the state of the media, what independent media are doing, and what we can all do as activists or independent journalists in trying to bring changes to the sorry state of certainly mainstream media. On the wing over here is Laura Flanders. She once was the coordinator of the women's desk at FAIR, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. She's now the host of Grit TV on Free Speech TV and Fire Dog Lake and elsewhere on the net. Her latest book is Blue Grit.
Well, what annoys me is you have a city full of people, a city filled up with people with a certain amount of hope. Some of them are inside the Democratic Party, some of them are outside the Democratic Party. What does the mainstream media do? Really, their knee-jerk reaction is to pour on scorn. Hopeful, it must be a cult. They must be just here for the celebrities, the canapes, the cocktails. You know, I don't actually think everybody is here for the canapes and the cocktails. But, you know, John McCain is plugging into a very well-greased hot button, if you grease hot buttons, I'm not sure. When he tries to put in our minds that everybody at an Obama rally is just there to see a rock star. What we're not hearing is what's really drawing people here. Which, sure, they may be turned on by Barack Obama and the idea of his presidency, but they're here because change is needed in this country. They're here because you've got 250,000 foreclosures every month. They're here because we have a healthcare system that's killing us and we have an environment that's dying. I mean, I think that's what's missing in this coverage. We say we get campaign coverage, we don't. We get candidate coverage. And what draws people into campaigns and what has drawn people in extraordinary numbers, some of them really holding their breath and crossing their fingers, but what's drawn people into this campaign in particular is a desperate need for change in their lives, not just in the White House. And I think that's what the media are missing. It's pretty much what they always miss. It's what I wrote about in Blue Grit. But it's very obvious this week in this morning's newspapers, not that I actually saw a print copy of any paper, but I did peruse a few online, that after Michelle Obama's speech, which was, I thought, very smart and very passionate and brought up a lot of interesting stuff to talk about, the media were talking about how tonight we'll be talking about family issues. You know, they move right on. And they talk about how it plays in the polls, how it plays in the punditry circles. I didn't hear anything, really, about how the people here responded to that speech, what was in it, and how much their lives do or do not resonate with what Michelle talked about. So, I think it's the demos part of our democracy that gets missed in the coverage, and that's, us, the people. Or is that we?
For me, to follow up on that, you're right, there wasn't enough responses from the people on the ground, and I went around and took interviews and put it on my blog to show what it meant for Michelle Obama's speech for many of the women, particularly women of color, that were there. And one of the things that's really important that we see missing is that the reason that Michelle Obama had to do that speech, because she had to do it, is because she was portrayed as non-patriotic, that she was an angry black woman, and that is based on the results of the lack of images of black women in the media, the lack of diversity of the backgrounds, multiple backgrounds that black women come from, that she had no choice but to do that speech as a result of the attacks on her because of what the media believes black women stand for in this country. Why do we need those other voices? So that other women like me who have her background, who come from poverty in some instances and move up to go into Princeton, or those that are still in the middle class, we're not hearing their voices. Why aren't we? Because media cannot imagine that black women have voices, or that they have voices from diverse perspective, or they have anything to contribute to our political process. So that's where the problem comes with having big media tell us what we should be listening to and portraying this presidential election in the way that it has. It really gives women of color a really good look at how we are viewed in this country, particularly by the media. So we have to stand up with the stories that we can find and our voices to show and tell that that's not our America. That's not where we live. You're not telling the stories that we see every day. And she had to tell that story last night to prove that.
It seems like with the corporatization, the conglomeration, the tabloidization of corporate mainstream media, there's been a real boom in independent media. And in many ways, it's a result of the failures of corporate mainstream media. One of the biggest failures is the four-letter word Iraq. It was corporate mainstream media that enabled it. And independent media are booming. I want to hear from the panel on some things. How are independent media filling the gap? What role are they playing in recent months or recent years? Why are they important?
There's a wide range of folks in independent media. Some are embracing new media. Some are traditionalists but are doing things outside of corporate media, and it's important. And some of that has been facilitated by the advent of technology since that point in time. And others have just been out of sheer necessity to put out voices that are not being covered in mainstream media. And the other thing is, there is fierce collaboration. People, particularly on the left, are learning how to play well with others, going back to kindergarten and doing it right. And when I covered the convention in Boston 4 years ago, I was the only blogger who had a site that reached a predominantly black audience. There was very little diversity. 4 years later, I've met Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans, feminists, queer, you name it. We are out there, and we are talking and collaborating in ways that I haven't seen before, and that's very powerful. Now the question is, how do we build capacity? How do we build capacity so that we can scale this movement? Because it is a movement, and it's very similar to the abolitionist movement. It's interesting that we're here in this church because my great-great-great-grandfather was a militant Presbyterian abolitionist. And when you think about what the abolitionists did, I mean, these were some radical folks. You're talking about multiracial collaboration. You're talking about, oh my goodness, yeah, they were breaking laws. They were doing everything because it was the only thing to do. And in some sense, what we're doing in the Netroots can live up to what has been done by prior generations. You know, we're looked at as, in some cases, pariahs for those of us who are not validated by mainstream media. But the reality is we're taking control of technologies that are in our hands, and we're also talking to people who don't necessarily look like us, who are not from our neighborhood, not from our communities. We have strong relationships with people we've never met. And that's deep, where you're really forming a community of consciousness, a community of conscience. And that's very powerful. So we're not doing anything new, but with these technologies, we're able to do things in a very powerful way that can be replicable and can be taken to various forms in different organizations, whether it's political with a capital P or not, religious, ecumenical, educational, entrepreneurial. We can do that. And this is just the tip of the spear.
If you haven't checked out Afro and Edison, I really urge you to. I think that still we have the power of independent documentary media. I think that documentary film in particular, Meeting Resistance is pretty much the only film I've seen that has tried to educate Americans a little bit about who the resistance are in Iraq. Fabulous film. If you haven't seen it, do. The most powerful film I've seen recently that filled an enormous gap in our conscience is Trouble the Water, that's getting a screening this afternoon, produced in part by Danny Glover. Truly, I mean, talk about independent media. The woman who made that film, Kimberly Rivers Roberts, was literally stuck in New Orleans in the run-up to Katrina arriving. She couldn't get out of town. You watch her try to get out of town. She has a consumer little video camera. And when she finds out that she's not going to be able to get out of town, she says she lives in the 9th Ward. And she says, okay, well, I'm going to shoot this whole scene and see what happens. And she shoots for a week in the run-up to the flood. She then shoots as the waters are rising, and that's not metaphorical. She shoots the water at different levels in her house. She then shoots from the attic of her house, where she and about 4 of her neighbors and her husband are trapped for hours as the water is coming up around the rest of their neighborhood, until they see a young man, Larry, who's been the sort of scourge of the neighborhood, a former drug user, exactly the kind of guy that was cast as a threat and a thug in the mainstream media. Larry was the one that came to the rescue. He floated down with a punching bag from a gym and floated out most of the old people trapped in their homes and in those attics when, if you called 911, the operator would tell you there were no emergency services. There were emergency services. There was Larry. And Larry's exactly the kind of guy who has been so framed in our media that even when he, in the wake of that flood, was saving people, we as a country were sending out private contractors and National Guard to try to shoot him down. So I would say Trouble the Water is an important intervention. And then I couldn't agree more with Chris about collaboration. I mean, I think the exciting thing about Grit TV is we produce, I do a bunch of the show in a studio, and then the whole rest of the show is contributed video from the entire world of grassroots video makers, community groups, poets, performers. If you're a video maker, send us your video. If you're a documentary maker, we feature a different short. We feature a segment of a different documentary in progress every single week and allow those documentary makers to make a pitch to get finishing funds. I mean, I think that's how we're going to thrive. We're never going to be as big as the big guys. But boy, when we stretch our tentacles around the planet, we can cover this world, and we can cover it better than the other guys do because we actually want to. Thanks.
So community radio is filling a huge gap. It's voices from the community, it's stories about the community, and it's not this parachute journalism where people are just coming in telling you what's going on in your world because they've been here for 5 minutes and they're going to tell you what's up. It's the community is making this news themselves, and it's empowering because people can come and do it themselves. It's open access. And just to give you an example of what we're doing about 7 to 9 hours of coverage every day. We've got 1 full-time news staff. We share it between 2 people, and we're doing more coverage than any of certainly the corporate stuff, but indeed any of the other models of radio out there. So community radio is a hugely empowering thing. It's definitely filling a gap, telling the stories about the community, the issues from the community, and getting the voices of the community on the airwaves.
So when I think about community media, I also think about social media. And I would say some of the things that are changing, for example, recently for DNC 08, C-SPAN started following some of the followers of Twitter and other medias, social media tools. And why is that important? Because bloggers are posting their blogs, they're using the video feeds from their own cameras, but now they also have access to places like C-SPAN to use that feed and integrate their conversations into their stories as well. But most importantly, they're able to use those tools. These are free tools. These are tools that they don't have to spend money for, and they're able to engage in the political process. They're able to tell their own stories. They're able to show you what's happening on the ground in their communities. This also, one of the reasons that I am such a big advocate of the digital divide, because if we don't have people who know how to use those tools, then they're not able to show you what's happening in their community. What happens when politics impacts their communities? What happens when a certain legislative bill passes to them and their ability to eat and keep food on the table? What's happening in the economy that's affecting them? The views that I talked about, women of color in all different walks of life, giving them an opportunity to share with you what their lives are really like. These are important tools that makes that possible. That's why blogs are important. That's why alternative medias are important. That's why other opportunities for people to get their voices out there are critically important. And what I do is I go around and I ask questions and I use my cell phone on the ground, getting opportunities from my community for them to tell everyone else what's going on. And I hit a button and it goes live using Others. There's actually an Others ambassador here at the DNC who's doing exactly that. She's telling stories by going up to each individual and having them tell the world what's happening from their point of view at the DNC here at Denver. So those are the things that I see changing that gives us an opportunity to change. We'll never get as big media, but we'll be able to change the conversation. But I do have to say, CNN and CNBC actually started using feedback from the Twitterers. So those who were following were able to actually put their questions out to CNN and C-SPAN, and it was talked about by those reporters. So they're following us in social media, and that's important.
If Obama's the president, and there's a bigger majority of Democrats in the House and Senate, that once and for all, forever, we get net neutrality put into law so they can't discriminate against certain websites while favoring commercial websites that they profit from. I'm talking about those who bring us broadband, the Comcasts and the Time Warners. I'll pass the mic, and assuming we have an Obama administration, what should activists be prepared to do? Let's get some short comments and then we'll open it up.
I think we need to have a united campaign for media literacy, because you can't have media justice without being media literate. And it's not fair to have a conversation with folks who forget that essentially there's 8 white guys who control all of corporate media. If you don't know that information, you're operating at a real loss. And we need to let folks know in real, strident but simple terms what's going on, what's at stake. And we can do this via old media, new media, in local communities, in virtual communities, in many ways, intergenerationally, multiracially, on every level. That's something we can do right now. We have everything we need to do it, but we have to connect the dots. So before media justice, we need media literacy, and making sure that happens is really important regardless of who's in office. But particularly with Obama, we need to prove too that it would be very hard for Obama to be President Obama if it wasn't for new media and the freedoms we took advantage of while we still have them.
Well, I think in addition to Michael Copps as the chairman of the FCC, I think we should have Jeff Cohen and Carol Jenkins from the Women's Media Center on the FCC. I think that would be fun. The net neutrality issue couldn't be more serious. We also have the question of new satellite media, satellite services, also having a public service requirement. We don't have that yet. We need that now in the same way we have on cable, we need in satellite. The fairness doctrine. Somebody said to me that the media activists had worked that back into the Democratic Party platform. Is that possible? Yeah. Yes, says Jeff. That's why he should be on the FCC. The right bear grudges very well. And they're very good when there's something they really hated happened 25 years ago, like the Vietnam War was ended, reversing that, starting a new war. Not to be flippant, but I don't think it would be out of place. Executive order, I restore the fairness doctrine. How about that? And finally, at the FCC, the fight hasn't only been about corporate control, although it has been about corporate control. It's been about also attacking and manipulating the minority set-asides for license holders and newspaper and television ownership. Ward Connolly was able to manipulate some of those minority set-asides in California, but that doesn't mean that those set-asides were a bad idea when we have the kind of imbalance that we still have demographically when it comes to who owns and controls our means of communication. So I would add that to your list. But I think to get any of those things, we need Jeff and Carol on the FCC. So.
I need to be media literate. We need to be active media consumers as well. And that means supporting the media that's doing a good job and maybe not supporting the media that's not doing a good job. The corporate media only exists because advertising dollars, and if we, we're all part of that too, and we are complicit in it. So be aware of your role in this as well. So be an active media consumer. And the net neutrality is absolutely huge. It's not just for websites, it's also for the community radio stations as well. So every radio station is also broadcasting on the web, and we are greatly affected by those issues too. And write your local Congress people. Let them know that you're aware of these issues and that you want their support for issues like net neutrality.
So as a runner-up to all the other conversations, there are some things I'm not going to repeat about net neutrality, media literacy, but I am going to repeat, I'm going to talk about things like digital literacy. So when we talk about media literacy, digital literacy is really important because everything is cross-platformed. So you have your text messaging, you have your social media tools, you have your cell phones, you have your laptops, and it's really important that people understand how all these are a part of our media strategy and how to use it effectively. The other things that would be important is not just the FCC changes, but also the broadband initiative changes. And when we look at this, it's the same thing. Companies are pushing for broadband, but they're not pushing for literacy programs and education around that. There's a lot of community technology centers out there that are trying to get those voices heard, and they're having problems with the broadband initiatives because they're soaking up all the money. And all the program money for training and education is gone to deployment. Basically putting the wires in the ground to get it to places that should have already existed in the first place. But now we're spending more time on that and not spending the time on, once it gets there, how do people know how to use it? That's what that's about. It gets deployed, but they get their money for deploying it. But the people who need to use it and get access and really use it as an empowerment tool, be a part of the media, do not have the training and education to use it. So then what happens? It's going to sit there. We'll come up with a new initiative after that. So we also need to be intentional about what these initiatives are doing and how they impact the people that are affected, most importantly by them. The other is about the digital transition. Again, same thing, moving from analog to digital. We also know that this February 9th, everything will go digital for the TVs. There are people who will not know that their TV set is not working because there's no longer an analog signal. That's really important. How are they going to participate or know what's going on if they are not aware of these things that have already taken place? These are already transitions in place that were agreed upon by our legislation a couple of years ago. It's just being deployed now, and we have people who still don't know that their TVs are going to go off. And then lastly, when we talk about these policies, we really need to talk about how we can be a part of it and tell the stories necessary for these policies, and make sure that when the policies are being discussed and talked about, that we can have individuals say, this is what it's going to mean to me if this actually happens or doesn't happen. That's so important and so key.